Go gadget pixel reducer!
Oh god! Oh, the pixels! The pixels, where they're going! Ah!
Hello everyone, I'm your host Pensyfan19 and welcome to the 6th Pensyfan19 Q&A special. The reason why it's 6 instead of 4, even though the channel's been out for 4 years, is because back in the day I used to do these Q&As based on subscriber milestones, but sometimes that would result in 2 Q&As in the same year, and then I basically started counting from the first one, so I'm not really sure if I'm going to continue the whole numbering system after this one, but basically, as per usual, people ask up to 3 questions. I'm going to do the whole thing unscripted. I think we have a pretty general idea of how most of these Q&A response videos work, and I have a whole lot of questions, almost 100 of them as a matter of fact. Thank you all for submitting your questions, but with that said, I don't want to make this intro too long, or the rest of the video for that matter, so let's get right into the questions. What is your favorite Class 1? BNSF. Mostly because of railroad diversity and for technically not using PSR. Favorite railroad station? Definitely Penn Station, New York, because I've been there the most whenever I'm traveling on a train, and it has a lot of history to it. It's also the busiest train station in all North America. How did you get your username? Now, despite referencing the Pennsylvania Railroad, albeit with a typo, I actually referred to the Pensy since the Long Island Railroad, which is my home railroad, is a subsidiary of the Pensy, and a lot of the Pensy's influence can still be seen on the IRR today. And the number 19 is just from the year 2019, since it was a good year for me personally, and it was also the last year before the pandemic hit. Do you want to go into preservation? If yes, what locomotive do you want to preserve? Now, I'm not really sure about going into railway preservation as a career, but I'm definitely a member of an existing museum, namely the Railroad Museum on Long Island out in Riverhead. But in terms of preserving a locomotive, I would probably go for one of my local ones, such as the EMD DE30AC, and outside of there, definitely a GE Genesis, and at least a P32 and a P42, since they're pretty common passenger engines out there, and they're iconic in their own right. What do you think will be the locomotive to survive the longest that was built in the last 35 years? I would probably say the Dash 9s, mostly because the Class 1s keep on rebuilding them instead of purchasing new power. Favorite train horn? Probably the Leslie RS5L. I don't think I got the name right, but if it's not the right one, I'll put the correct one up on the screen here. Favorite locomotive type? I would probably go for the EMUs, since they're pretty efficient. They represent both commuter use as well as urban use with subways and multiple units, and they're also the lastest longing locomotive types out there, since their electricity is provided by an outside source, so you need fewer moving parts, and they're basically combined in multiple unit configurations instead of one unit. And with all that combined, you have an average service life for an EMU of anywhere upwards of 50 years. What's your favorite heritage/special interest unit? Probably the Pensy NJT Heritage Unit tied with the BC Rail Heritage Unit on CN. Thoughts on BNSF retiring the SD70 Max? I really hope they don't. I mean, I heard they've been doing a great job, especially on coal haul runs up in the Powder River Basin region, and especially seeing how FIT down in Mexico is buying a lot of secondhand EMD power, hopefully they find a second service life on there, or at least on other railroads. Especially seeing that a lot of other short lines and Class 2s have been purchasing a lot of former 6-axle power from the Class 1s. Is UP 6706 preservation worthy? Yeah, definitely. I mean, not only would it be nice to have some CNW units in preservation, but it's also nice to have some more recent GEs in preservation too, to showcase a more modern aspect of railroading. But preferably, it should be preserved in CNW livery, just to keep its railroad heritage. What do you think of Planes? I mean, I thought it was pretty good, but I can see why it got the backlash that it did, because a lot of the characters and a lot of the setting felt very similar to the original Cars movie, and technically that was supposed to be a one-and-done deal with Disney focusing on a spin-off on planes and on trains and boats next. And I'm really surprised that they still went for Planes, Fire and Rescue, which, even though I felt was a better movie than the original, probably didn't really fare so well in the box office, and they just scrapped the entire Cars spin-off franchise, which also meant we lost Metro, which I still feel, in my opinion, would single-handedly save Disney's financial woes at the moment.
This is post-production Pensyfan adding this in. I think the question was referring to Planes in general, not the Planes 2013 movie. Overall, I think Planes are pretty good, but I feel we should have more intercity rail service, especially in the US, since they're better for the environment and carry more people. I just wanted a reason to talk about Metro and how it would be better for the rest of the world if it existed. Back to the Q&A.
If you know what looks-maxing is, which locomotive looks max better? Definitely the Siemens Charger for Ontario Northland. As much as I love Brightline, my favorite Siemens Charger variant has to be the Canadian ones. So that specifically goes for Via Rail and most recently Ontario Northland. It's a great combination of modern yet still looking tough. And it's also not that long of a consist, so it kind of fulfills the whole ideology of the streamlined doodlebug somewhat, in which even the smaller and lesser known passenger lines are still getting something sleek and stylish to show that the railroad cares about the region. Do you still have any hope left for the Avelia Liberty? Seeing that they're testing some units now, maybe, but I'm still not really sure when they're supposed to be starting service or how long they're honestly going to stay in service, and I'd still prefer the American Pioneer 220 over them. I'm so glad that Brightline West chose the Siemens train sets instead of the Avelia Liberty again. But hopefully Alstom does get most of their problems fixed with the Avelia Liberties. Eventually. Favorite M&R electric train fleet? I'm gonna go with the M3s because of the front window being unobstructed. That and they're also pretty classic in their own right, and they don't get any complaints from Metro-North commuters because they refurbish the interiors to look like M7s. The only reason why the IRR M3s get a lot of complaints is because they basically kept their original interiors because they thought that the M9s were eventually going to replace them. But not enough M9s came in on time, so now they're kind of stuck with older trains that they don't want to refurbish if they're going to get rid of them a little bit later. But basically, the M3s on Metro North are probably one of my favorite, the electric fleet, since you have the history of Bud and a pretty comfy interior. Thoughts on CT Transit? They're pretty good, and I'm glad to see that they started commuter rail between Springfield and New Haven. I just hope that they could eventually work something out with the Coast Guard and finally extend over to Mystic and Westerly, and hopefully meet up with an MBTA extension to Westerly or Kingston. So this way you could fully traverse the Northeast Corridor via commuter rail, which is a trip that I probably intend on doing once such a connection is made. If you could nationalize a Class 1, which would it be? Could open up passenger rail and electric service potential. Now, I'm not saying by nationalize I wouldn't want them to go out of business, but one railroad that I could see ending up being nationalized, and this might not be too much of a surprise, would probably be Norfolk Southern, since I hear that most of their profits aren't really doing too well because of the East Palestine derailment, and from what I can tell, I think most of the legal work and lawsuits for that are still going on. So, and seeing how such a wreck got the railroads in such a negative light in the general public, then I could definitely see something happening to Norfolk Southern, at least in the near future, whether it be fully nationalized or being acquired or merged with another railroad. But this is just speculation, and all of this is subject to change in the coming months, depending on how everything turns out with them. But that's just my opinions on something that I could see happen to at least one of the Class 1s.
Want a Sprite cranberry?
One of the best memes of the late 2010s. And besides, I usually go for a Sprite for a drink. Thoughts on the EMD tunnel motors? The NYSW has too, so yeah. I think they're pretty good. They have a pretty nice fan base on their own, especially with the Southern Pacific and the Rio Grande. And while doing my research for Unbuilt, I actually found it pretty ironic that, despite all their other mechanical flaws, the SD50 actually performed pretty well in the tunnels and kind of ended the whole tunnel motor series. I mean, there was going to be an SD50T had things not worked out with the SD50 further, but yeah, it's an unexpected twist that I don't think a lot of channels talk about all that much, with the SD50 kind of canceling further production of the tunnel motor series. And I'm also really surprised that EMD also decided to put some of the tunnel motor mechanics on a switcher, namely the MP15T, and that a few of them are still in service. Any opinions on the new build engines of Britain, like Beachy Head and the Unknown Warrior? I think it's pretty cool that a bunch of heritage railways in Britain are still building steam engines. Now granted, it would take several decades for them to eventually be completed, since from what I can tell, the construction process isn't as quick or guaranteed when compared to a regular production engine, since most of these projects are being financed based on donations. But it's still nice to see the finished product, that you're bringing back a piece of history with so much support over in the UK, and it brings a lot of good attention to the heritage railways that they run on. I just wish that we could have more new build programs that are so quick and have so many of them here in the States. There are way too many classes of extinct steam engines that we could easily bring back with programs like that. Hopefully some of them can also bring their expertise over to the US, which I believe is also the case with 5550. I think a lot of people who are working there also worked on the A1 Tornado project over in Britain. Of all the existing stations on the LIRR, which do you think is in the most dire need of an upgrade and why? Now, I'm not entirely sure, since even though I live on Long Island, I haven't visited every particular station on the railroad, but this is probably going to be a common answer, but I would probably say Mineola, since even though their decision to put most of the Oyster Bay tracks on the one track kind of makes sense because they don't want to interrupt the third track, I feel a better station layout for that would probably be 2 island platforms. So this way you have more capacity at Mineola itself, and you also have more time for the Oyster Bay branch to be separated by itself, and to not cause too much of an interference on the main line. Do you think that the implementation of Grand Central Madison and East Side Access was a success, a failure, or a mixed bag? I personally think it was a success, even though it took practically forever to eventually build, procure, and finally open, even to the point where the MTA had to push back their December 22 opening a little bit. It's still definitely worth it in the long run, because it provides a great and seamless transfer between the LIRR and Metro North, even if using the existing conditions of going all the way underneath the subway tunnel at 63rd Street basically puts the LIRR station much further deeper when compared to the lower level of Grand Central. But Grand Central Madison has a lot of cool little facts in itself, such as the main waiting area being part of the former lower level, and because of that you also have a direct connection to the lower level track platform, which is a pretty cool connection that I've used quite often in order to go directly from Metro North to LIRR. But with that said, if I were to design LIRR access in the Grand Central, I would have went underneath the Steinway Avenue tunnels on the 7 train, and probably would have started construction in the 80s, since the 7 train was already undergoing a series of renovations that already limited its service. So had the LIRR just built their tunnel during the 7 train renovation, then that would also put it close enough to ground level where it could meet up with the lower level of Metro North, and thus have better connections. Given that the Moroccan Royal Train, the last set of unaltered SPV 2000s on Earth, is still operational to this day, do you think there's an opportunity to potentially reverse engineer the aging Amfleets into a new wave of SPV-style DMUs once Amtrak starts retiring their fleet? I'm sure there'd be plenty of short lines willing to run little shuttles along their ways with shiny, reliable old buds once again. I mean, I don't see why not, but I wouldn't really focus on converting Amfleet coaches in the SPV 2000s, especially seeing how the diesel motors for the SPV 2000s are much less reliable when compared to the earlier Bud RTCs. And not only that, but in this day and age, it would probably make more sense to convert to battery when compared to putting a diesel engine on a rail car. And speaking of which, I do feel, to kind of go off track, I do feel that Pop-Up Metro is doing a great thing by converting a bunch of retired London Underground subways, but I feel that just by limiting the company to D78 stock and importing it over to the US, I feel it's being way too limited. They should expand to converting a bunch of former subway cars in the US that are actively being retired and convert those into battery-powered multiple units for the same purpose as pop-up metro. So this way you're giving a bunch more subway cars, such as the R32s and R46 from New York City, a new purpose of life in connecting so many smaller communities for commuter rail service as shuttles, essentially. And yes, if you want to try to convert AM fleets or SPV 2000s into these battery-powered rail cars or pop-up metro, then that might be a good idea as well. The more rail cars you have, the better. If you could have 6 routes in the FRA long-distance study map implemented, which ones would they be and why? Great question. Of the bunch, I would definitely say Chicago to Miami, since there have been so many Chicago to Florida services that have been cut off by Amtrak since '79, and even in a bunch of the other inner city maps, they've never really directly connected Chicago to Miami, which is a pretty popular corridor in itself. New York to Fort Worth and Dallas would be a pretty nice corridor as well, since that's also bringing back direct New York to St. Louis service, as well as bringing back a popular to St. Louis-Dallas corridor, that especially existed with the Frisco. St. Paul to San Antonio would be nice as well, since it's good to have a little bit of a connecting line in the middle of the Midwest that doesn't necessarily stop at Chicago. Denver to Seattle would be nice as well, since that's also bringing back the Pioneer, most notably the section between Salt Lake City and Seattle. St. Paul to Denver is a nice route as well, since that's also bringing a bunch of service to South Dakota. Nice to see that South Dakota is finally getting some recognition in the passenger rail study. And lastly, I would probably say Detroit to New Orleans, since that does a good job connecting a lot of Midwestern cities too. If you could save 2 UP engines that haven't been repainted from either CNW or SP colors, which one would they be and why? To be honest, I don't exactly know which particular UP or SP engines still have their original paint, but I would say one CNW-9 or AC44 that's still in CNW paint, and another wide cab SP engines. I say the wide cab since they're more commonly associated with road engines, and they seem to be more commonly seen when compared to switchers. Fill in the blank. The giant 4-car Transcontinental Limited. Thanks, Western Ohio Interurban History. What inspired your interest in trains? Every rail fan hates to admit it, but yes, it was Thomas. In my particular story, it was studying my local home railroad, namely Long Island Railroad, as well as the New York City subway system, and then from there just expanding further to Amtrak, trains around the world, a lot of fallen flags, and basically comparing and contrasting a lot of American railway systems to the previous ones, focusing more on fallen flags, and particularly in the passenger rail aspect in terms of trying to see where more passenger rail services could be expanded and included. How many model locomotives and rolling stock do you have in your collection, and does it change from time to time? I usually get about 1 or 2 new O-gauge engines or train sets per year, mostly due to the model train display that I volunteer out at during the Christmas time. And at this point it's probably, I don't know the exact amount offhand, but over the several years of collecting trains, definitely like 10 to 15 years at least. Probably over 50 at this point. It's pretty expansive, but I'm grateful to have such a large collection. Albeit not all of it is 100% prototypical, more seasonal, but it's still good. If money, time, and resources weren't an issue, what steam locomotive, preserved or scrapped, would you restore to operation? Probably one of the IWR G5s or one of the Pensyfan H8s, since the H8 was one of the primary freight engines of the Long Island Railroad. And of course, scrapped would also be New York Central Hudson. Would you rail fan in Michigan? I currently don't have any plans to visit there, but if ever I'm in the state of Michigan, sure, I'll definitely rail fan there. And this goes for any vacation that I'm on, by the way. If I'm near a train or a railroad, I always find some sort of way to rail fan it if it fits to my schedule. If you could save any 3 locomotives from any Class 1 railroad, what would you pick? Technically not a Class 1, but definitely the DE30ACs on the IWR. Even though they're unreliable, I grew up with all of them, and I do not want to see them get scrapped. Hopefully they all get sold to Metro since they all have EMD prime movers, or at least rebuilt so that they can run a little bit longer and provide more frequent service on Long Island. As for the other 2s on Class 1s, I would probably say a Dash 8 from CSX, since they seem to be pretty iconic and I don't think we have any in preservation yet. And probably a SD70 Max, for the same reason as the previous one. What's your opinion on the new CPKC Jiva that's out? It's nice to see that some engines are finally being repainted into the CPKC scheme, even though it's personally not my favorite of the 5 options that they had either. It's nice to see a refresh of color on the expansive system, and I'm interested to see how other engines will look in it too. Will you ever see the big boy? I haven't seen 4014, but I did see 4012 at Steamtown twice. What's your favorite British steam locomotives? Top 3 are probably going to be, I don't remember all the classes offhand, and it's been a while since I've studied extensively on British steam engines, but it's probably going to be the LNER J70, GWR 5700, and the LNER A4s. What's your favorite type of cheese? Cheddar. When are you going to do a face reveal? I've been going back and forth about doing a face reveal, or at least participating in videos that will kind of require a face reveal, such as Miles in Transit or Classy Whale, since I've been an active fan of them and I notice they usually do a lot of Northeastern trips, which is the region where I'm generally in. So I don't have anything confirmed at the moment, but it's kind of a big decision I have to consider, though. So I'm not sure when or if I'll get to it. What's your favorite Long Island Railroad branch? Definitely the Port Jefferson branch. Mostly because I rail fan it the most, and it has a pretty nice diesel shuttle service with the occasional rare maintenance move. What is your favorite country? Art in the US, I would probably say Japan for a lot of culture as well as an incredible railroad network. Not just because of the Shinkansen, but also because of other luxury trains such as the Shikishima. What is your favorite railroad? Passenger Long Island Railroad, Class 1 BNSF, Fallen Flag, Pennsylvania. What do you think about Jersey Mike's subs? Incredible sandwiches, always great with cold cuts and cheesesteaks, and their cookies are the best ever. Every time I go to Jersey Mike's, which is at least once or twice a week, I always go for the larger cookies. It's a perfect combination of flavor and size. It's not too hard, it's not too soft, and it's just completely filled with flavor. And all their other sandwiches are good too. So I strongly recommend Jersey Mike's, as they're one of the best sandwich places out there. Do you ever plan on making the trip to Scranton via Amtrak once that route is done? Yeah, definitely. I'd love to take Amtrak to Steamtown when they eventually get it done. I'm also interested that Amtrak is taking over the line from NJT, since unusually NJT seems to be taking way too long on restoring service there. Would you ever get into gaming on your channel alongside trains? It depends on the video game, but I noticed that gaming channels do tend to be a little bit more popular, so I'll probably try out a train simulator of sorts, since I don't have any experience with any of them at all, so... And if not that, then probably something in the Mario series, like Mario Kart or one of the Super Mario Brothers, since I used to play it out a lot when I was younger. Would you be open to having a memes-only style video every so often? Not like every week, but like every few or so months, just so that you don't tire yourself out with all the memes and railroad news. I mean, probably, but I wouldn't want it to take up too much space when compared to other documentaries that this channel is known for. The best Amtrak route of all time. Definitely the California Zephyr, especially west of Denver. The views there are some of the best in the entire Amtrak system. Coaster or Metrolink. Probably Metrolink for a more diverse fleet and a more expansive network. Best EMD locomotive. The GP38-2. Can you visit latitude 42 degrees 5649 north, 74 degrees 1236 west? After punching this in, this is apparently Amsterdam, New York. Again, if I'm in the area, I'll probably visit there, although I don't have any direct plans to go there specifically. But as per usual, if I'm in the area, I'll definitely rail fan there. It's a pretty active spot along the New York Central Main Line too, or the former New York Central Main Line. Now it's CSX, water level route, and the Amtrak Empire Corridor, which still sees a lot of action. Favorite NJT heritage unit? definitely the Pensy Heritage unit. What NS rebuild locomotive is your favorite? Of the bunch, it was actually going to be 8520, just because the red looks pretty good on the gray. Unfortunately, it just so happens that my favorite NS rebuild unit was the least successful of the bunch, as it eventually got sold off to a handful of short lines. How would you feel if the Milwaukee Road Pacific Coast extension was restored? It would be nice to see it back to service as another line to transport freight, maybe as another transcontinental CPKC route since Canadian Pacific took over the Milwaukee Road, but I'm not sure if most of it will be electrified as it originally was, especially seeing how Class 1s would rather use battery engines and overhead, but they'll probably just use it as, at that point, probably just a single track extra line to probably move more intermodals, but it'll be nice to see it back, as well as some local services there too. Ever considered some Western or international episodes of fixing your branch line? Don't worry, I'll be getting there soon. I did consider an episode on Cuba's commuter rail network, but since that was combined with the existing commuter rail network, I've kind of put that one on hold. But the current schedule for fixing your branch line is Go Transit, Metra, and then Metrolink. Since, keep in mind, they also have to have more than 4 branch lines. New CPKC paint. You like it or not, Chief? Not really. It's basically CP2. Option 3 would have been the best option in my opinion, but at least it's something different on the main line. Use Rusty's, and you too can look like me! Ka-chow! I tried my best with this voice impersonation. It's something I might consider in the near future, but come on, I'm a huge fan of Cars. I bet I'm gonna know the entire script of Cars word for word. Would you ride behind the Long Island steam engines once they are restored? When 39 eventually gets restored at Strasburg, definitely, since I go there somewhat often. Although 35 unfortunately is being restored to cosmetic display at this rate, so that one wouldn't really be applicable. That and the IRR isn't really too keen on excursions in the first place, since they're kind of busy running their own schedule of several regularly scheduled passenger trains, and they don't really like excursions interfering with their regular runs. What is your favorite class of steam locomotives? The New York Central Hudson. What is your favorite Amtrak paint scheme? Definitely Phase 6 or Phase 7. Phase 6 on the Chargers, but I'm so glad that the Genesis engines are getting repainted in the Phase 7. One, it shows that they're still going to keep the P42s around, and two, they look so much better in red and two-tone blue when compared to just blue and silver for Phase 5. What is your favorite class of British locomotives? As mentioned earlier, probably the A4, and on a more modern note, probably the EMR Class 810. It's a nice combo of streamlined yet still kind of boxy, in a way, and purple isn't too common of a color over there. Which IRR station is your favorite? Port Jefferson tied with Penn Station. Which Metro North station is your favorite? Riverdale, because I rail fan there often, and it gets some good Amtrak action. Have you ever tried out Via Rail in Canada? Not yet, but it's definitely something I'd like to do the next time I'm there. He said MNRR, bring out the Modoc Northern engines! This is a California's Forgotten Railroads reference. Go subscribe to Fresno Suburb, since this is an amazing series that I highly recommend watching. What is the best cereal? Lucky Charms with a combination of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Whom's this a fellow named Joseph? That would be Joe, the F40PH, as seen in the profile picture. What is your favorite flavor of the colors on a scale of 1 to 10? I would say red is probably an 8 out of 10, while blue is a 7 out of 10. Honorable mention goes to yellow at a 7.5. What your future for your channel? Currently unknown. I'm just uploading as much as I can whenever I have some free time, but I'm not dedicating myself to a schedule too much for this channel since I have way too many things going on outside of it. Favorite Long Island locomotive? The GP38. Thoughts on CPKC paint scheme? Option 3 should have won. Will you go to Wisconsin? To be determined, but maybe. Most likely Milwaukee. Should we have a Brightline service in the northeastern US? Doesn't necessarily have to be along the NEC. Wherever Amtrak doesn't go in the country, insert Brightline there. Or at least a company like Brightline, so Brightline itself wouldn't be too large to focus on too many regions. Opinion of the streamlined locomotives of the GWR. You tried. It's not too streamlined, but something full on would have been nicer, in my opinion. Favorite heritage unit. NJT Pensy Heritage Unit and CNBC Rail Unit. Favorite LARR units. Currently active would be LARR number 404. Previous would be one of the GP38s. Best spot to rail fan. Princeton Junction, New Jersey. What's the best PRR division? Definitely the Long Island Railroad. If not there, unfortunately I don't know all the division names offhand, but definitely a division that covers the Northeast between New York Penn Station and Philly. What's your favorite collaboration? Definitely the 4th of July Bicentennial Unit special from Cal Unit Productions, since I think he just asked for me to give a sentence on the LARR unit, but I just went all out on the history of the LARR GP38s, and even included the Bicentennial unit that wasn't even part of the Bicentennial in 1976, but I still wanted to go over the history of it anyways. Have you heard of our Lord and Savior, BNLE 643? Yes, I have. I'm pretty impressed to see that such a large engine is in preservation and is finally being cosmetically restored at H Esteem. So I can't wait to see it back fully restored, since it has a pretty good history. Which Amtrak route do you think is the most needed? Definitely Minneapolis to Kansas City. It's nice to have some connecting services in the Midwest, since there are a lot of cities there that definitely need more Amtrak service. Have you considered doing the Fixing Your Branch Line episode on the Camden line? Unfortunately, probably not, since Mark just doesn't make the 4 branch line criteria of Fixing Your Branch Line, but I can definitely see how it would be considered for the series, since it is the shortest of the bunch and doesn't get too much ridership. Favorite steam, electric, and diesel locomotive? Steam is going to be the New York Central Hudson, electric is probably going to be the Pensy G5s, and diesel is going to be the GP38-2. Also, if some of these answers are consistent when compared to previous Q&As, it's just been a while since I've done the last Q&As, and sometimes my opinions on these engines slightly change, or some of these more general questions, depending on what I've researched lately. Would you ever consider making a gaming channel? Probably not, in favor of more traditional documentaries. What year would you go back in time to railfan? 1951, because that's when you have a lot of early generation diesels still running with a lot of classic steam engines, and you also see a lot of newer models of 2nd gen EMD diesels starting to enter service. What's your favorite museum that you've been to? Definitely the Illinois Railway Museum. Their collection there is one of the largest I've ever seen, and most of it is pretty well kept too. What's the most underrated station you've visited, in terms of aesthetics or functionality? I would say Port Jefferson, since it was recently restored and has a whopping 6 tracks. Now granted, only one of them is used for passenger service, but I also feel it doesn't get too much rail fanning for that matter, and it serves a pretty popular region in Long Island. Which restoration project are you most keen in being up to date with? Probably one of the LARR G5s, in combination with the Atlantic Coastline Pacific that US Sugar is restoring. And of course, SMS Rail Lines number 6, since that was also my very first episode of Remarkable Engines, and I'm looking to do a remastered version of that once that finally starts running. Well, at least running with its new coat of paint in regular excursion service. Do you have a favorite underrated fallen flag? I mean, in the general Northeast region, probably the Lehigh Valley, since there isn't too much footage of it before the 1970s, although it has a pretty big following in itself. But in terms of all-time fallen flags, now this is a really obscure one, but back in the 80s and 90s, there was a division of Illinois Central known as the Chicago Central, which basically operated the Illinois Central lines that went between Chicago and Omaha. But in addition to the IC Diamond, as well as GP38s and GP10s, they painted their engines red. And the shade of red with the Illinois Central Green Diamond, it is such a perfect mix on that engine. It looks so good. And there's practically any footage of these Chicago Central GP38s, and not too many people know about the Chicago Central in general. Technically, it was a subdivision of the Illinois Central, and the Death Star livery at the time was more commonly seen, but I feel this particular division of the Illinois Central doesn't get anywhere near as the amount of respect and acknowledgement that it deserves, especially with that incredibly good red and green livery on the GP38. What is the best railway/railroad logo? Probably the Pennsylvania Keystone, since it was also used for the Long Island Railroad. Which is your favorite Western railway/railroad? Most likely the Santa Fe. Do you have a car? I personally don't have one, since I usually share the family car, but most of the time I try to take public transit as much as I can. You have a favorite private passenger car? And definitely New York Central Hickory Creek, since I've seen it a handful of times and it represents the 20th Century Limited. Do you think the LIRR should have a special Railfest event? Yes, they absolutely should. It would be nice to see at least something different at one of these LIRR stations instead of regular power all the time. And it would also be nice to have the general public learn about the extensive rolling stock history of the Long Island Railroad and other neighboring railroads. If you could restore one steam engine, which one would you choose? Restore to active service would still be the Pennsy H8. I know since the last Q&A, I believe Strasburg has started a cosmetic restoration on the engine, thankfully. What kind of music do you like? A little bit of everything, mostly rock, a little bit of jazz, a little bit of hip-hop or rap, and some modern music as well. Some of my favorite bands include Aerosmith, Weird Al Yankovic, Rolling Stones, Billy Joel, and, as of right now, Tally Hall, and MF Doom. What is your favorite heritage unit of all time? I guess another commuter railroad that I'm going to mention in terms of heritage units would also be Metro 211, since they did a pretty good job with the Burlington Heritage livery, and it's probably my favorite of the bunch. What is your least favorite heritage unit of all time? CN 8898. Basically the one time where they took a regular CN engine, slapped the 25th anniversary logo on it, and called it a heritage unit. What is your favorite railroad paint scheme? As of right now, probably Amtrak Phase 6. Class 1 would most likely be CSXYN2. Fallen flag would go to the Santa Fe War Bonnet. Do you think Metro North would preserve one of its heritage units? I mean, I hope so, even though they're relatively old engines. If they gave them a heritage livery, they probably want to keep them around for at least a little bit longer. What gear do you use when you rail fan? Usually a Sony DLSR, sometimes a monopod, but if I'm just on the go, I just use my phone. I also have a Nikon camera that I use for photos, but I haven't really used it too often. Rail fanning the Raritan Valley Line when? Soon, trademark. What's your thought on the Amtrak Northeast Region extension to Long Island? I'm not really sure if it's happening based on certain sources, but if we get direct service from Ronco to the rest of the Northeast Corridor, great. If not, I feel like that's the one route where it would kind of be okay if it didn't come to fruition, solely because the LIRR already has so much service to that region in particular. If you could drive a train on any LIRR line, where would you drive a train? Probably between Penn Station and Port Jefferson, since the line is pretty scenic. What color is your favorite shirt? Dark green, since it represents a LIRR shirt that I got from an employee once. When do you think LIRR will order the new dual mode chargers? Probably about 2 or 3 years after Metro North started testing them out, hopefully to identify all the design flaws with the chargers and to eventually fix them by the time the LIRR gets them. Do you think that the MTA will ever opt for hydrogen fuel cell or battery electric in the future for LIRR and Metro North? It is an interesting concept, but I'm not sure if they will be doing it anytime soon, especially seeing that they already purchased the Siemens chargers. Opinion on second generation Dodge Dakota. A pretty classic truck in itself, and is probably one of the last notable trucks that Dodge made before they split up into Dodge and Ram. Favorite heritage unit. I feel like I should make this question one of the questions that shouldn't be asked in the beginning since it's showing up way too often, but Pennsylvania BC Rail and Metra's Burlington unit. Do you like anime? I haven't watched too much of it, but one of my particular favorite animes from a while ago is JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, which I still have to get around to watching because a lot of other things are going on at the moment, but I hear it's a pretty good show. I'm also trying to see if I could maybe get into One Piece or Attack on Titan, since I hear those are pretty good too. What is your opinion on the fact that CPKC is now painting their ES44 ACs into their livery? Should have been option 3, but it's nice to see something new. But it would make more sense to at least keep the existing shade of red on many Canadian Pacific engines, so this way you're not using as much paint with the new livery. So this way you're also not painting red on red. What is your opinion on IR 271 and the history behind it? It's nice to see that a bunch of former Long Island engines are still serving freight on the railroad, and the more engines you have running on Long Island, the better. What is your opinion on LARR DE DM30s getting replaced by the Chargers? As much as I love them, I feel about time that they would eventually get replaced since the Chargers are probably going to be more reliable. But again, I just hope that the DE and DM30s don't get scrapped. What is your opinion on LARR getting rid of the GP38s and not keeping any? I'm just glad that they kept the MP15s, since at least one of the two iconic diesels of the 70s are still serving around for maintenance engines. And I'm also glad to see that even though they're no longer on Long Island, the GP38s are still seeing a lot of diverse service, such as leaser units working for Canadian National, and some of them are even the new Phase 7 units on Amtrak. What are your thoughts about maglevs? Pretty interesting technology, and I hope to see more of them eventually built, especially between DC and Baltimore, and eventually New York. What is your favorite European country for high-speed rail? I would say France because of the TGV, and they also currently hold the record for the fastest conventional railed vehicle, namely the TGV POS at 357 miles per hour. What is your least favorite high-speed train? Probably the Avelia Liberty, since not only is it limited by the infrastructure that it runs on, but it also doesn't seem to be the most mechanically reliable, and it hasn't even entered service yet. When, or if really, Steve Valero opens Canada Trains commissions again, which steam locomotive would you like to see him create next? Probably a Reading Pacific, since they already have 2102, and it probably wouldn't be too hard to modify it into a Pacific. Would you consider Texas and Pacific 610 as a remarkable engine? Even though all engines are remarkable in their own right, it wouldn't really qualify for the series since remarkable engines tend to focus on lesser known or obscure engines, especially with more recent entries. Could you listen to Journey's Remember Me and then express your thoughts on it? It has a pretty good beat, pretty good song overall, one of a few great songs from the Armageddon soundtrack. Thoughts on Southern Pacific? Definitely one of the most iconic railroads in California. Oregon or NorCal? Reading, not Sacramento. I would probably say Oregon, since that also includes Portland, which is also home to a certain engine of remarkable engines. Thoughts on Mug Root Beer? I didn't really have it too often, but I think the meme space on it are pretty good. Opinion on the new GNW Heritage units. The more Heritage units, the better. When will you go and catch a steam excursion? I'm curious. It depends on when I have time to catch one and when one is basically nearby where I generally am. What is your favorite engine on NS? Probably the SD70 Ace. Do you have plans to collaborate with other railroad YouTubers / trip reporters like Heist, Trains Are Awesome, Delay and Block? I don't really have any plans as of now, but it depends on the type of video that I'm working on. Basically what the style or what content certain creators focus on the most and what kind of expertise they have on the topic at hand. And that's how I would usually make a best decision to collaborate with a certain user. And besides, I don't want to say who I'm going to collaborate with because that would probably give away details of upcoming videos. If CPKC's revival of regional and long-distance intercity rail service in Mexico is a success, if so, which part of their network is a prime candidate for possible restoration of rail service across North America? I'm hoping for some sort of Mexico City to San Antonio service, maybe as a through service with the Texas Eagle as well. I also say that because there used to be a bunch of rail services, mostly through the Missouri Pacific, that went directly to Mexico City, as well as a few other lines from the Southern Pacific that went from LA to Mexico City. Have you heard any news about potential privatization of the Alaska Railroad? If this is true, what are your thoughts about it? I have heard of a plan recently to privatize the Alaska Railroad, but honestly I'm not sure if it will be needed because it wouldn't be broken up into smaller railroads, and there's also the fear that it will focus more on making money or profit rather than providing an essential service, especially somewhere that far remote in Alaska. I think the Alaska Railroad is doing pretty fine as it is and probably doesn't need to be privatized. Will you do more videos of Alpha Omega? Unfortunately, that's the one series that's kind of taking a back seat in favor of other ones such as Unbuilt and Fixing Your Ranch Line, since I personally find the topics of those two series a little bit more interesting, and there isn't too much to go on about for Alpha Omega. But don't worry, I do plan on continuing that series after the last 2 episodes in regards to Class 1s, and I'll probably rebrand it into something else. What is your opinion on Mr. Beast wrecking 4 GP7s? I mean, it's a common engine class out there, so it's not too big of a loss, but it's still a bit of a shame that a perfectly good preserved engine that's been saved for decades was randomly bought up just to only be completely totaled just for a few stunts. And I definitely don't recommend doing that with rarer classes of engines. How do you think the LARR schedule could be improved? Run more train to less frequently visited branches, such as Port Jefferson and Oyster Bay. What new LARR branches should be built? Restore the Wading River branch. The right-of-way is already there. All you would have to do is just get a few feet of the backyards right outside the Port Jefferson yard. Another good candidate would also be the Sag Harbor branch for the same reason. What is the one line that you could think Amtrak missed in their Connexus plan? Not counting the long-distance map, definitely some sort of Louisville to Nashville connecting service, so this way that whole region has intercity in addition to proposed long-distance service. Number 4. I'm just kidding, there is no 4th question. Oh, okay. If you had a private luxury train, what type of train and coaches would you choose, and what would delivery look like? I was considering one of the 2 Osgood Bradley coaches that was stored at the end of Hillside Yard, but unfortunately they ended up being scrapped as of recently. In terms of livery, it probably just would have been the iconic blue and white LARR livery that all the P-72s got. Do you think that the BL-36PH and F-125 would have any chance of being operated by commuter rails if the SC-44 didn't exist, or could be good competitors of the SC-44 as diverse options for commuter rails alike? I mean, probably if the Charger was never invented, but I'm not really sure if they're too reliable when compared to the Charger, hence why the Charger became so popular, because they were fitted with Cummins engines that are pretty, I don't want to say easy to operate on, but they seem to be more reliable when compared to the other 2 options. Which railway do you think is overrated, overhated, and underrated, and doesn't get much attention? I don't want to say anything is overrated per se, but in terms of being popular while having a mixed history would likely be Conrail. Overhated would probably be the Southern Pacific, and underrated would be Seaboard Airline. Hello Internet, welcome to Pen Theory! What would be your suggestions to improve Amtrak or VIA outside of their Windsor and Northeast corridors? Try to run more corridor services at a frequent rate. That means more than 1 train a day, guys, preferably outside of the Northeast. And if that's not possible, probably spin it off to Brightline or Brightline-like companies. What are some of your hobbies besides trains? I'm currently in a handful of percussion ensembles, and I'm also a fan of the Disney Pixar Cars movie. If If I can't think of too much, just know that it's the middle of the night of recording this. Team Kendrick or Team Drake? Forget about Kendrick, forget about Drake. It's all about Dr. John Clark. He gave us the Gap Rap, which is so awesome that it's still my Railroad.net bio. In terms of the beef between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, I haven't really been following it too much, but this video does a good job of explaining the whole situation. Are you planning to pursue a career in railroading? If so, what kind of career are you planning to make in railroading? As indicated in Fixing Your Branch Line, I've always been interested more in the design aspect or operations of railroads, and the occasional railcar design as well, but it will probably be more of a urban planning or consulting engineering career in order to properly determine what lines should go to where. Should the IRR electrify the unelectrified portion of the Central Branch? Absolutely, it is the easiest branch that they could electrify, and it could also divert some rush hour trains that go directly from Penn to Babylon, or the city terminal zone to Babylon in that case. I think the only thing they would have to consider there is probably some of the property with some of the switches, but all it is just a single track electrification between Bethpage and Babylon. That's honestly much easier to electrify when compared to other branches such as Port Jefferson or Oyster Bay. Say you're on a trip to film the most trains possible. What country do you visit first? Japan. 1000% Japan. Their rail network is not only extremely built up, but they also have a very diverse roster. Burger King, Wendy's, or McDonald's? Definitely Wendy's. I remember several times when I was younger where I would constantly get a Wendy's hamburger and fries. And their fries are some of the best they have to offer too. Second only to Five Guys. Since there's an Amtrak Night Owl service, Northeast Regional but equipped with sleeper car between DC to Boston, apparently not anymore, that US medium distance similar to Europe, which other 7 routes you can pick for another night train-like route, state-supported routes, city proximity, electrified or not, any parts in the US. In terms of adding more overnight services, I would probably say the Vermonter from DC to St. Albans, Pennsylvania from New York to Pittsburgh, the Empire service from New York to Niagara Falls, the Borealis from Chicago to St. Paul, the Cascades from Eugene to Vancouver, and even though they're supposed to be in one day, the Carolinian between New York and Charlotte, and the Palmetto between New York and Savannah. Since they're planned for high-speed rail in Cascadia, Portland to Vancouver, and one between Atlanta to Charlotte, what rolling stock should they use for HSR? Example, Via Liberty, Siemens Pioneer, entirely new train. In terms of dedicated high-speed rail, I would suggest the Siemens AP220, and for utilizing existing right-of-way, probably a Siemens Charger and Venture set, similar to existing Brightline Florida. For Dreamstar Line, a company that's bringing night train service to LA to San Fran, what rolling stock should they use, especially San Jose to San Francisco, since it's soon electrified? Locomotives like F40PH, AM7 sleeper cars, but a Renaissance rail car. I don't think they need any specifically electric engines if they're going from Los Angeles to San Fran, because most of that route already is not going to be electrified. So I would suggest probably, if you want to be real fancy, probably any existing sleeper cars that are preserved in museums or part of private car fleets. But in terms of new sleepers, I would probably go with the CAF Viewliners or whatever Amtrak is going to purchase as part of their new long-distance freight replacement. 4. Was that too much wording? No, it's fine. I'm used to long questions like that. And they're pretty in-depth. They're good questions. 5500/5600 C40 LFRs of Orange County, California. What's your opinion? The what? It's a bus. Cool.
857 sold to LTEX.
I just hope it gets used for some sort of passenger service instead of being stored forever, like so many other engines at LTEX. The first CDTX Venture Cab car has been delivered. Yes! Is the next iceberg MBTA? Technically I'm going down to NEC first, so the next one is Mark/VRE, then I'm going back up for MBTA. SD70 family, or GEVO family. I would say the GEVO family since it's much more expansive. What do you think is the worst Fallen Flag besides Penn Central? Don't really have any least favorites, but probably Erie Lackawanna, since it wasn't all that good either, in terms of financial status. Would you like it if the LARR did rebuilds to the DE30AC? I mean, I hope so, at least until more chargers arrive. What do you think of Brightline's state at this moment? Pretty good, not perfect. They have some places to improve in terms of upgrading. Brightline Florida should definitely focus on extending to Tampa and eventually Jacksonville, and Brightline West should definitely consider adding a second track to most of their main line once they open, or at least soon after they open, but they're still doing much better in terms of development when compared to Amtrak. Favorite team of all the big four US sports leagues: NFL, NBA, MLB, and NHL. The New York Giants, the New York Knicks, the New York Yankees, and, favorite of all, the New York Rangers. What do you think of the CPKC's Final Spike Steam Tour? Pretty good. I mean, it's pretty nice for a Class 1 in this day and age to hold such a massive Steam Tour, especially for holding a Steam excursion to Mexico for the first time in decades. Could you make a video on the Soo Line? I don't really do histories of entire railroads all that much, but I'll look into their roster and see if there's something unusual that they had that I can do an episode of Remarkable Engines on. If you were to pick one steam locomotive, one diesel electric, and one electric locomotive to have in your backyard, which would they be? Steam would probably be LARR 35, diesel would probably be one of the sideline LARR SW1001s, and electric would probably be a stored AEM7, likely from Mark. I'm just saying these because these are the closest to my general regions that are stored and not in service. What are your thoughts on PRR 5550 actually beating the speed record without derailments or too much damage? I mean, I hope it eventually does that, although it's interesting that it makes sense that they're using the Pueblo Testing Center, because that's where a bunch of train sets are utilized for high-speed rail, but I feel it might be more interesting to test its top speed on an existing main line to see how it does in, I guess, the real world instead of a testing facility. What's the most cursed locomotive you can edit together? I could probably think of something, and if I did, it'll be up here. Rio Grande K37 Daylight. As a matter of fact, you just answered what I could do for number 3, even though it's a forced question, so thanks. Favorite electric? Pennsy, Amtrak, Foreign, etc. Probably the streamlined P5s in addition to the GG1s. Favorite branch you discussed so far? Probably the Atlantic City line. SD70 Ace or GEVO? SD70 Ace. Besides 4663, what is another streamlined doodlebug that you wish was in preservation? Definitely Alaska 216, since that was a pretty creative engine all in itself, and it's on a pretty iconic railroad. What is one of your favorite films not owned by Disney? As of recently, I would probably say Don't Look Up with Leonardo DiCaprio. If you ever went on an all-expenses rail fanning tour of the lower 48, who are some YouTube rail fans which you would want to hang out with? Probably the ones you mentioned as well, and maybe some smaller rail fans to help give them some recognition as well. And so that they could probably better inform me of the local rail fanning operations in that specific region. How would you feel if Brightline made heritage units of the Atlantic Coastline, Seaboard Airline, and Seaboard Coastline? That would be incredible if they did so, but technically they would make heritage units of Florida East Coast, which I'm not really sure if they could do that because the FEC still exists. So, and Brightline doesn't really like history to begin with because they want to be modern and brand new, so it would be cool, but I'm not really seeing a possibility of a Florida East Coast of a Brightline heritage unit anytime soon. If anything, those heritage units should be done by Tri-Rail, since they actually run on former Seaboard and SCL trackage. If you had a special line on locomotive with your channel branding, like what Eric's Trains and RBP Trains did, How would it look like, and what locomotive would it be? I think we all know which locomotive I would choose for this one. It would be the one, the only, Pennsylvania 4663. And if that's not possible, LARR 404. I mean, for 4663, it doesn't have to be one of the streamlined ones, even a regular doodlebug would be fine. How do you feel about the T1 Trust build? It's nice to see that we have some new build Steam in the US, and I hope it encourages more new build Steam programs to eventually develop a lot of extinct Steam and diesel engines in America. Will you ever do a video on the PRR tubular/Keystone train? That's actually been one of the more general topics that I've been considering making a video on. It's just that I'm not sure if it has as much priority as compared to something like Unbuilt at the moment, but it's definitely something that'll be in the works in the coming future. What is your opinion on the Southern Railway's narrow gauge? I wasn't aware that the Southern had narrow gauge, but it's definitely something that I'll look into as well. About seeing what Class 1s technically had their own narrow gauge operations and didn't just assume them from other lines. Would you ever be interested in doing the video on Hawaii's narrow gauge railroads? I mean, I think I'm aware of a handful of a few other narrow gauge railways in Hawaii, but I'd like to see if I could focus on many of the narrow gauge operations in the mainland US first, especially the Southern now that you mention it. Any CN locomotives that interest you or like to talk about one day? Not any at the moment, but I did talk about a handful of them in CN Alpha Omega. Favorite rail photographer from the Steam era? Definitely Donald W. Furler, since he got a lot of photos of lesser known and underrated northeastern railroads such as the Lehigh New England and the New York Ontario Western, many of which actually came in handy for a recent episode of 404s of the World. Most underrated excursion locomotive? Probably LNN 152. What is your favorite British steam locomotive? The LNER A4. What is the most overrated locomotive in your opinion? Not that it's bad, but probably the SD70 Ace. What else are you interested in besides trains? I mostly play the piano, xylophone, and other percussion instruments. I also have a large collection of US Mint coins as well as test toy trucks. I'm also a huge fan of the Disney Pixar Cars series, and I also play chess. Top 3 favorite British locomotives: LNER J70, LNER A4, and GWR 5700. Do you think railroads in the US should be nationalized? It works in other countries, but I'm not sure if it works in the US since at the moment there seems to be a lot more funding for highways, and if you put it in charge of people who give more funding to highways, they might not give it as much attention in favor of the highways. But if there is one aspect that I feel should be nationalized, it would definitely be the tracks, similar to Network Rail in the UK. So this way this opens up more opportunities to have new kinds of passenger and freight railroads hosting service on said tracks. If you had to remove one railroad in North America, what would it be? None of them, because they all have their purpose of transporting goods and people on a daily basis. If you could bring back one branch line, what would it be? The LARR Wading River branch. It's a pretty easy 10-mile extension that would connect a lot of towns to the existing Port Jeff branch. What is your dream loco that was not preserved from the 1970s to present day? I guess in terms of being scrapped from the 70s to present day, most likely the P30CH, since it seems to be one of the more popular engines that wasn't brought back or rebuilt somehow. Which would make for a better setting of a TV show, Patchogue, New York or Danbury, Connecticut? Probably Patchogue, New York, since it seems to be more developed, if you want something modern day, in my opinion. If you were in a jazz band, what instrument would you play? Definitely the vibraphone, especially seeing that I've played one on a handful of occasions in my high school percussion ensemble. Thoughts on the Cats Red Line revival in Charlotte? It's nice to see that the city of Charlotte recently purchased a track from Norfolk Southern, and I'm glad to see that they'll be getting some more commuter rail, and hopefully they expand it to a few more lines in the general region. What is your favorite non-commuter rail carrier in Canada? Definitely Ontario Northland, because not only do they have a pretty good freight roster, but they're also the first railroad in decades to run both passenger and freight operations in North America. Technically, I think Smart Train is also offering freight service, but I think it's branded as something else for some reason. But this railroad is going to run Siemens Chargers and Venture coaches in addition to SD75s. Now that's cool. What is your least favorite LARR project of the past or future? Not that there's necessarily a least favorite, but as controversial as this may sound, I'm not really sure if I would emphasize electrifying the central branch over something like Oyster Bay, since technically all that you will be getting for the central branch electrification is just direct city zone to Babylon service, which can't really go past Babylon. I mean, it would divert some express trains, but they wouldn't really have too many stops to begin with, and it would be adding more traffic to the existing lines. Whereas if you were to electrify Port Jefferson or Oyster Bay, then that would also be freeing up some diesel sets for other branch lines that need it more, and also running more frequent service on lines like Oyster Bay. What is your favorite LARR project of the past? Definitely accessing the Penn Station, since it's also why the LARR has a lot of Pennsy influence to begin with. And trust me, it's a lot better for Long Island commuters to go in directly to Manhattan instead of getting off at Long Island City and transferring to a ferry. It's because of that connection as to why many LARR commuter services still exist to begin with. What do you think is the most important thing for the railroad to focus on improving in the next 15 years? Definitely electrification to Oyster Bay, and specifically double tracking the Port Jefferson branch. Port Jefferson sees a lot of frequent shuttle services, but if they were to double track the line, and there's plenty of space to do so for most of the route, then that would add up for a lot more capacity for better flow of traffic and more frequent service to Port Jefferson. What's your favorite Long Island food and drink? Definitely the Long Island bagel. Along with, I don't really have a favorite drink, but usually lemonade or ice water. Do you have opinions on NYCT R32s? Pretty good subways that were kind of breaking down but could be reutilized for battery multiple units if Pop-Up Metro were to acquire them. A lot of missed opportunity with just scrapping them instead of using them for something else. Do you want a coat? I wouldn't mind one, but I don't think he wants a coat. What is your most overrated railroad and most underrated railroad? Overrated would probably be Conrail. Underrated, come to think of it, probably New York, Ontario, and Western. Even though they didn't serve too many places of interest, there's not too much info on them. Or much of the railroad at all, to be specific. What is a class of steam locomotives that you would have saved? New York Central Hudson. Other than that, probably the Reading Pacific. If there was one place you would want to live in the US, where would it be? Probably somewhere in the Chicago region, definitely for rail fanning purposes, and to be closer to the Illinois Railway Museum. What is your opinion on BNSF's handful of AC4400 CWs? Pretty good, although they kind of blend in with the rest of the Dash 9s. Do you think freight locomotives look perfect on passenger trains? It depends on the freight engine and it depends on the railroad. Not a lot of people notice, but the LARR technically utilized not just GP38s, but also MP15 switchers on their passenger engines, which, even though it may not look right for some, they still use it to the best of their advantage. What is your favorite state? Most likely Pennsylvania because of railroading history. Pennsylvania tied with Illinois for that matter. What do you think would be a good new build for an obscure extinct class besides 4663? Probably the Pennsy L5. What's your favorite railroad museum? Definitely the Illinois Railway Museum. If you could create an Amtrak route not currently on any proposals or commuter network, what would it be? Definitely the restoration of the Phoebe Snow or the Black Diamond, so there's specifically direct New York to Buffalo service via Binghamton and Ithaca. Those two cities are some of the largest towns, or at least largest regions in the state of New York, that haven't had direct rail service since the formation of Amtrak, and have never really had any official passenger rail proposals as of late. Hello everyone, my name is Pensyfan19. Do you know Cal Unit Productions? Of course I do. I collaborated in one of his videos, he collaborated in one of mine, and he has a lot of very good videos. Could there be more streamlined doodlebugs if pictures of them were more rare than the other doodlebugs? I'm not sure how there would be more of them if there would be fewer pictures, so... Who would win? Me or Buster, the diesel locomotive, not the Arthur channel? I'm gonna say Buster for this one. No offense. Could you explain the Milwaukee Road meme to me? I think C-Vision Productions explained in a comment once that they had to, I think, re-record the narration for one of their Milwaukee Road videos, and I think it's because they had to do it over some sort of music or something like that. But the way they just said the Milwaukee Road, especially seeing that there is a parody channel of the Milwaukee Road Railroad, how they used that Milwaukee Road audio clip in several of their videos, and seeing how that parody channel eventually became famous, the Milwaukee Road audio clip that they used became even more famous than the channel itself. Would you have liked to see more preserved LARR steam locomotives? Absolutely, especially the H8s. Will you ever do a parody of Roll On Big Boy but with PRR 4663? I might consider it, but I'm not sure if it'll have as high of a priority when compared to regularly scheduled documentaries. Favorite mini Shinkansen train? The Shinkansen E6. Favorite Japanese subway train? Probably the 6000 series. Favorite BART train car? Definitely the A-Class. What's a locomotive that you liked that was nearly almost saved but was scrapped? Definitely New York Central Hudson, because I think there are a handful of examples where someone tried to preserve a Hudson but it didn't go through. That along with the Milwaukee Road A-Class. Where would you rail fan in Africa? Probably South Africa. What is one piece of equipment you wished had taken more pictures of in hindsight? Definitely the Pennsylvania Railroad Silverliners that were in Strasburg, since those Silverliners for some reason ended up being scrapped, likely to make more room for something that I think arrives later on but didn't. I don't know what the story is behind those, but... And probably more AEM-7s. Which former railroad would you like the MTA to make a heritage unit for? Maybe a variant of the New York Central or the New Haven, since there aren't too many railroads that the MTA thankfully hasn't made a heritage unit for yet. How did you choose the 19 in your name? Based on the year 2019, since that was a good year for me overall. If you could restore one preserved Pennsylvania steam locomotive to working order that has not already been restored to working order, which one would it be? The H8 that's under cosmetic restoration in Strasburg. Do you think that Rhode Island should get a Class 1 railroad, along with Providence of Worcester? If anything, it would probably be a branch of CSX, seeing how, since they took over Pan Am, they basically run all freight services in New England. What do you think of New Haven Railroad FL9s? Pretty iconic in their own right, and some of the last good diesels purchased by the New Haven. If you could start your own heritage road, what equipment would you purchase? Definitely some LARR P72s, maybe some DE30ACs, ST70 Max, and probably some GP38s for good measure. What video project do you enjoy the most? Most recently, definitely Unbuilt EMD, because although it was challenging, I did have a lot of fun in researching various types of cancelled EMD locomotives, with some being much more obscure and having much more unusual designs than others. What's your favorite unusual locomotive cab design? Probably the Streamline Cab 4663, but other than that, the GEQ cab. If you happen to visit Southeast Asia for trains, where would you go? Likely somewhere in China, the Philippines, or Indonesia. Wisconsin Central, yes or no?
Yes! Yes!
What do you think of the New Haven? A pretty good railroad that unfortunately didn't really go down too good of a path due to bad management under McGinnis. What's your favorite Class 1 as of current? BNSF. What music do you like? A little bit of everything. Seriously, most of the time when I usually have my Amazon set list going on, I deliberately leave all my playlists in random, so this way I never know what I'm going to hear next. Have you ever gotten inside a locomotive's cabin, and which locomotive? I've been in several cabins of exhibit locomotives that have just been static displays in museums, but I don't think I've been in the cabs of any active diesel engines as of late, or ever really. Although I think I vaguely remember being in the cab of the Disney World monorail once, I think, but I don't really know if it was the front or on the side. And if it wasn't, this was a long time ago, as in before that collision that the Disney World monorail had back in 2009. So my memory on this is very fuzzy at best. Which is your favorite box cab locomotive? The PRR-DD1. What is your favorite school subject? Definitely US history. Or just history in general. Any kind of social studies. What is the #1 best horn show you ever recorded? That would be Return to the Double S Curve. I stole your cheese. Not the cheddar. Guess I'm gonna have to go back to Uncle Giuseppe's to get some more. What is your opinion on the Genesis? An iconic locomotive in its own right, and I hope many of them get preserved, or at least still remain in active service on Amtrak. Especially seeing how they're being repainted in the Phase 7, which I honestly feel is the greatest paint scheme not just the Genesis, but any passenger engine has worn in a long time. Best horn ever seen on the train? Probably some of the K5HLs on some of the IRR DE30s. HTC AAR or Blomberg trucks? Blomberg trucks. Favorite Rio Grande livery? The Bumblebee livery. What type of hopper is best, and why is it the Canadian Central ones? Because it's definitely something more unique and creative than most of the other hoppers on the rails. In your opinion, what's a passenger rail connection that is needed today? Boston North Station to South Station. You could also argue Grand Central to Penn Station, but that's more of an issue with third rail to overhead in terms of through routing. But you could very easily connect North Station to South Station given the proper tunneling. All you need is just overhead wires. Favorite first generation diesels? Definitely the E8s. What's your favorite type or class of unusual engine? The DE30AC, since they're only found on the LARR. Right, and with that Pensy one, I think we should be good at this. Oh, the 11 question submission once again. Alright, here we go. PRRK4, PRRGG1, or Streamline Doodlebug? Streamline Doodlebug. If you can bring back a fallen flag, what will it be? The Pennsylvania. Opinion on BNSF 6887, the ATSF ES44C4 sticker unit. Pretty good, and probably better than the existing heritage units. On your November 2021 periodical, you forgot about CSX 911 got its RS5T removed. I usually don't go over smaller news events like horns since I don't really keep up on it per se. AEM7 or HHP8, AEM7. Canadian Pacific or BNSF, BNSF. What's your favorite Union Pacific Heritage Unit? 1995. Opinions on Amtrak Phase 5. Kind of bland, but Phase 6 and 7 are so much better. Norfolk Southern or Canadian National? Norfolk Southern because of heritage units. What's your best catch of 2023? The FRA inspection train tied with a work move going to Port Jefferson.
That's a fender bender.
And as of recording this at 3:30 in the morning, that's exactly how my head feels about staying up this late to record a Q&A in the middle of everything else. So excuse me, thank you all for watching.
So now that the outro's done, I'll try to see if I can finally go to sleep for once and crash out for a bit.